Good.
Amazing.
Welcome to Data Story Time. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. How are you doing, Catherine?
Oh, I'm very good, thank you. I'm excited to dive in today to some exciting stories with you. But just before we do, give the audience a quick recap of you and your role and what you get up to in your organization.
Yep. I am Sid, and I am a VP of Data at Live Nation International for the international division. I am in the space of data for last 20 odd years, doing data from data warehousing to focusing on digital analytics and applying data to build great products, services for digital and offline business. And my role here at Live Nation involves focusing on creating a data strategy and implementing that strategy to create a more sustainable business and grow our customers and fan base further.
Amazing, exciting role, of course. Now, just as with story time, to the audience who've been watching these episodes, all of my guests speak about their career as a whole. So I'm sure I'm going to be asking you questions, Sid, about not just Live Nation, but kind of beyond that as well. Now,
Yeah.
with all of these interviews, I've very much given the power over to my guests in steering the story you want to tell. Now, when I reached out to you and I said, "Hey, Sid, do you want to come and chat to me about a fantastic data story?" And you said yes. And I said, "What would you like to talk about?" And you said data monetization, which I you want to talk about because it's a hot topic. In actual fact, in our most recent London roundtable, it was yet again voted to be one of the discussions that people wanted to talk about. Um, so, same for me. Why are we talking about data monetization? Why did that, before we talk about the story, why did that one spring as top of mind of something you really wanted to discuss on this platform?
Yeah. For me, data monetization is key. And I would also want to touch about what do you mean by data monetization, because I know there are
Mm,
different interpretations of that, and I'll touch upon that. But for me, why data monetization is important, I see data as not just a standalone piece within the business. Data is spread across any business unit, and the key role for function of data is to drive those business outcomes and to make more business more profitable with the help of additional information and power that data brings to that table. That is the key, and that serves the ultimate goal. Yes, you have to go through a lot of steps to be able to build a great foundation, the governance side of things, creating a strong architecture and design so that the products that you build are sustainable. But ultimately, the goal is to focus on your customers and the products that you are building. And I think that is the key mindset for me. The data monetization piece is making sure that I understand who my customers are within the business, and what products that I'm building, and are these products relevant for the business. And this is where the data monetization definition, or what my take is data monetization, the way I see is data monetization as two pieces: is applying that to internal businesses to drive incremental growth, revenue, and or save drive efficiencies. That's what I
mm,
love and would love to talk about. There is an element of creating money out of data as well, and creating new revenue
yeah.
streams of data by selling data, using it for different purposes. There is an element of that data monetization, which I'm not going to talk about today, but it's about implementing and utilizing it for business purposes.
I'm really glad in that you mentioned about the cost saving element as well, because I think very often when people say data monetization, they do think about that generation of revenue, but actually the monetization piece can be that cost saving element as well. So I'll be keen to dive into that. Okay. Set the scene for me then. The story you want to tell me on data monetization, where did that begin, and how did it kind of come about for you?
Yeah. So the story I'm going to talk about is how data was implemented for a media business. I won't go into detail in terms of names, but it was one of my the places that I did that extensive work on how data was utilized to drive business and subscribers for the media business, and that drove revenues and then efficiencies at scale as well. And before we understand and go into the data side of things, it's important to understand what do you mean by the media business and how that media business operates, and what does take. And this is something that helps understand where data is applied. So for a media business that I'm referring to, they're producing content. They had moved from a print focused business to a digital focused business where they were producing the content on the digital platforms, a website and on social media platforms. And that content was consumed by consumers across the board, and the revenue that we were generating was via advertising, via subscriptions, by people paying for their content, and some element of e-commerce as well. So this is how the model was for that business. And their challenge there was they were have that sustainable business, but they wanted to strengthen their customer base further and drive subscription growth further. They also wanted to make sure they had a good balance of advertising revenue and subscription revenue and to tweak any kind of production and content volumes affects one or the other. So they would wanted to utilize data to drive that decision making and make sure that the right type of content and the right strategies is in place to be able to drive and sustain both revenue streams. So that was the challenge that they had, and they was trying to help and create that data infrastructure and data strategy to be able to support them in this across this journey. And there were three pillars that I will talk about here. One is that's always starts with the business side of things, and what were their business goals, and how I focused on a certain set of metrics or a metric to be able to make sure that we're hitting the business objectives with the help of data, and then go into the operational side of things and utilizing data on the content production piece and the value of getting value most of the content that is being produced, and then how do we build products that are more data driven and helping engage the end consumers, driving engagement and loyalty, but also then aiming and hitting that business goal and the North Star metric. So these are the three key things that interest me, and this is the reason I'm talking about this story is, as I've mentioned, that this is where I feel data is truly put into use to drive those business areas and objectives and put into action, and also bring people together as well. One of the things that I always am passionate about is getting that data into the hands of the people, and there are multiple ways of do that. We talk about literacy and trainings, but in this example here, or this use case, is when you actually make it relevant for the teams and people start using data for the things that they want to optimize. It's is something that helps that broader cause of driving bringing data onto the table at every level within the organization. So that's the story. If I'll now go on and talk about in detail. So let's starting with the North Star metric. So I spoke to various business teams and across to understand what are the various objectives of the business, what is ultimately they're trying to achieve here. And yes, revenue, it was always start with is the revenue from subscription and advertising balance was key, but growing a subscriber base, which is more foundational, was key for that, but for the business in question. And what we identified when I spoke to different teams, that every team has a lot of metrics at hand, and they were using their own metrics to quantify and justify why certain things worked or didn't work. And if you understand the digital media business, you are exposed to quite a few tools on your platform, your CMSs, your websites, the analytics tools on the website, your social media tools, your different agencies and partners. You're exposed to variety of metrics, so everyone can use a metric they like to be able to share success. So one of the key things was to bring business together to a common metric, and this is where the North Star metric strategy came in play, to come up with a set of metrics, one in this question, two metrics, to help them all align and get together. What we found out after these audit and interview sessions and understanding the business better is the key goal for every part of the business came down to two things: is growing their subscriber base, B, making sure that the subscribers are engaged and there is high engagement, and in turn a renewal and a subscription top of it. So this is what they wanted to focus on. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to jump in there because I want to ask a bit of a sidestep question around culture. Now, obviously, we talk about data culture all the time. And what you're describing is probably, in terms of most organizations, these are the people that tend to be quite data driven, quite data literate naturally, right? And as you say, you set the scene there. You've got, Google Analytics. You go on LinkedIn. You've got another analytics platform within that. You go across to Instagram, etc., and all of that. And then, like I mentioned, the website platform again. And now you're saying, right, you've got all of this data. I need you to step back from it and just focus on these things. What was the appetite? What was the response to that request? Was it a case of, yeah, no, sense, we need to streamline, or was it these metrics, because perhaps they make me feel a bit better as well? We talk very much about vanity metrics, especially on social media. You can talk about impressions and things, which, unless they make money, it's all good, but it doesn't have any meaning. So what was it like when you said, right, we need to focus in on these two?
Yeah, the key was to how we position this. It was not taking away the metrics, and I think that, from my experience, that never works. Is the keys to how to balance those things. We try and understood what each activity was, or the end result for each activity was, and ultimately we came up was to drive certain things. Yes, the metrics that they are looking at works great on that particular platform, and to optimize that platform. So they definitely need to use that platform. What the challenge they had was they were using this as a strategic metric as well. And this is where we came in, that you continue what you're doing at a tactical level, but at strategic level, what connects all of you together is this one common set of metrics. So it's not taking away what you already have, it's just adding a strategic layer to it, and which is then add the business rationale, the objectives, the revenue that is attached to those things, and making sure that what they are doing is connected there as well. So if you are doing a LinkedIn post, for example, and that is getting X number of views, you try a question like, what is the objective of that particular post? You trying to more views. Okay, why do you need more views? To be able to drive engagement. Okay, to be able to drive engagement for ultimately to drive revenue from advertising, or to ultimately for people to subscribe or to start a journey to a subscription. So hence we took along to that journey. And I think there's a framework. If you ask 5 whys, ultimately you get down to the business end of things and start unpicking those things as well. So this is how I did. Does that answers your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've often joked in the past that really the data officer's role in many respects is to channel their inner 5-year-old and just keep going, why, until you get to that foundational business reason. And I think from a strategy point of view, this is where it becomes very difficult if the why between what data are doing and the why between what the business wants to achieve are very different. This is how you can kind of run into some challenges. So yeah, you were mentioning about those North Star metrics, and I think that's really key, that you understand what those are, and as you said, it's on top of what the business is already understanding and doing.
Yeah, that's true. And so yeah, we agreed on those North Star metrics, and then we focused on the content. And they had a relatively interesting challenge on the content. As mentioned, this organization was already producing content, but the content, the vision for the content team was that we produce less content, and have more quality. So their strategy was, as for someone who doesn't understand media, is they produce X amount of content on a weekly basis. Their time cycle, 40 50 pieces of content for a bigger organization, smaller organization, 2 or 3 pieces of content, and you ramp up. Now if you want, there are multiple ways to ramp up. You can keep adding more bodies. You can have an army of editorial people and keep producing hundreds and hundreds of content and get the views as well, or the other way is to focus on key pieces of content that drives and resonates, and making sure you still get that balance right, and add more bodies, but to focus on different type of content as opposed to chasing the volume game. So what we try and the challenge was to have a long-term sustainable great quality content as opposed to going mass content. So we looked at different type of content parameters, and there are 6 to 7 content parameters that we looked at in terms of to understand that. So the first objective was to just understand what are they producing, and how is the consumption there, is looking at starting with what the volumes and the frequency of the content when they're producing, then looking at how and what type of content is it. We start bucketing content into different categories. Take an example of a news organization like a BBC, for the ease of understanding, is you have a news type of content, business, politics, technology, and you try and understand who's the author, the type of content, and things. Then you'll start looking at the type of content or the format of content. Is it text content, the video pieces of content, and so on. Then you'll start looking at how is this content consumed across various channels. So is it consumed on the website? Is it on the social media more? What exactly is the pattern, and how is it curated across? Was it curated via search? How is it curated via newsletters, and so on? And the other piece, how is the audience feedback of that particular content or pieces of content in terms of the number of views and engagement, and if it's like. So you look at all these parameters, and they'll look at the final and the most important piece is the value or the lifespan of that content. And this is quite critical to understand, is when a key piece of content is produced, what is the shelf life of that particular content? That's something from a product point of view, is when you have a product on in a store, for example, how that product can go on if there is a demand for that product. For a content, there is always a life cycle for the particular content, like a news content. If you read a news today, that has 1 or 2 days life cycle, goes off. For something which is a thought piece or an article, it has a longer shelf life, for example, or if you're looking for other. So you need to understand from all this content that they're producing, what is the shelf life of that content. Now, we looked at all these parameters, and we worked out with the editorial and the content production teams in terms of what is the plan going forward, and what are the strategies in terms of the investments and the production, in terms of the content, resources and cost. And we started coming up with a set of recommendations, is what type of content would work out well within the scenario, what type of categories they should be aiming for. The one and the final piece, which I just forgot to mention, and was the most important piece on the customer side of things, is when we started talking to these content teams and various teams within the business, is we have asked a basic question: who's your customer? And this is a very simple but a very interesting question that you get different answers from different teams. Is your understanding of your customer for any business is key. The challenge here in the media side of the business is you sometimes don't know or have different interpretation of who your customer is. So editorial team thinking about writing, when they're writing a piece of content, they have a person or thing in mind. I'm writing for a business professional or a technology professional or just a general audience at large. But you think from a product point of view, and building a website or a digital product, they have a different consumer in mind. So different business units had a different way of thinking who their customer was. We worked out with the help of survey and doing feedback from our customers to come up with 2 or 3 key personas that are relevant for that particular business. So making sure that the products that are built, the editorial team, and even from an advertising and angle, they're all thinking about the same customers, and the target audience is the same, and utilize that audience piece and the content cycle that I mentioned to be able to come up with a recommendation which help understand what categories they should double down it. If we give you an example, looking at thought piece and long content, and how many features that they should be producing, and the life cycle of how these features, or which of these features drive a subscription and is relevant. So they ultimately helps them goal. And we started testing that for doing experiments or a period of time to be able to see if those are hitting our core metrics that we are aiming for. And that helped not just doing and helping and hitting the objectives that was there for the exercise, but also, as I mentioned, it change the culture within these content and product teams as well. They're starting to look at numbers in a much more different way. They're thinking about audience and customers. They're thinking about not just how many views that I get for my article that I produce, because yes, you will get people because they are focusing on their content, but also what did it help achieve the long-term vision for the team and the goal as well. And it also and reduce operational cost as well, because instead of focusing and doubling down on people here and there, they were quite intelligent in terms of why and what content they should be producing for going forward. So there's cost efficiencies there that were gained out of the exercise as well. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. And I think obviously, you know, my background's in content, so a lot of what you're saying here resonates from both my background in actually doing it, but then as you say, the data piece as well. And I think um, this is interesting for me where you're augmenting data with their experiences as well, because you know you know, for example, I know that podcast content tends to have a longer shelf life than say some short form video, because you know I've known that from a gut experience and data experience of when people message me saying, "Oh, I just listened to this episode," and I'm thinking it was 2 years ago, but they're just, you know, finding the podcast and going back through the back catalogue now. So it's interesting to be able to apply data to that and help, you know, continue those informed decision makings. As you say, you know, make that difference with the monetization piece in making sure that the good work that these people are doing in their roles is ultimately steering in the direction that the business wants to see it. Because, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but what they were doing probably didn't change, but how they were doing it and kind of the direction they were moving maybe slightly pivoted. And I think that shows a real strong use case for how data can really be the power of steering those types of activities.
Yeah, totally. And I think, yeah, this is not asking them or to do something radical or different, but just the way they're looking at things, the way the operations are managed, as it adds an extra layer to them. It makes more data more meaningful and relevant for them. And I think this is quite important. When we look at numbers, it's not one of those additional things that they have to look at. It's part of that process. So when they're thinking about curation of a content, and sometimes it's a news element, sometimes it's things that they have to go and find out what exactly should be talking about and writing about, what have been created, or the products that have been created that help us as look at what has worked in the past, what didn't. We covered the same event last year. What was the result of that? So that comes all naturally because you already have ingrained all this within your processes as well. So it's that natural illusion that yes, training helps, but when it's everything is or the data is part of that process, and it's relevant for on the day-to-day basis, it just makes it take. And your job as a data leader makes it much more easier when it's out there and there is demand out there. Ultimately, what we are trying to do here, and the way I see it is, we created a product and we're trying to create a demand within that market. Like let's have that demand and adoption. And if there's a natural adoption here by doing these things, then you have done the job and you have a winner product in your hand.
Amazing. Well, Sid, thank you so much for coming on to Data Storytime. It's been lovely to chat with you, and such a great story with lots to take away for the audience there. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was lovely chatting with you. I hope you and the viewers found it useful and relevant. Thank you so much.